Alright everybody, welcome to the first week of CIS 170. This will be going over the different distros of Linux. So as we'll see here, we'll Google the different comparisons of Linux distributions and we will click on the link below. It's the comparison of Linux distributions is what I was trying to search for. You'll have to forgive me. Unfortunately, I did not record the I did not have the microphone turned on when I did this recording, so I'm dubbing the sound in right now. So my voice is not going to correspond. But that being said, Wikipedia is not a good reference for academic papers and reports. However, in the computer industry, you can find a lot of useful information there. Take it with a grain of salt. This comparison chart on this link right here is actually pretty good though. So again, they have some guideline things, but I want to focus now on these charts with all the different flavors of Linux and what have you. So in this far column, this says whether it's an active or inactive version of Linux. For example, this one is inactive. I would not recommend downloading it. It's probably old or out of date, and it might even be difficult to find. So that being said, the next thing I look at is where it's forked from. So these forks are the different flavors. A lot of times these different versions of Linux are based on the original kernel, and developers and different groups of people create their own versions and their own way of doing things. And again, it's still Linux. It's based on the original kernel. I myself like to go from the Debian forks, which includes environments such as Ubuntu. It would include environments such as Raspbian, which we'll be using for this class, Kali Linux, which is a security-based version. We'll talk about that in a couple minutes. Important. This right here, where it says gratis, where my mouse cursor is right now, this means it's free for you to use. There are commercial versions that are not free, and you'll get in a lot of trouble if you do use them. Some of these non-free versions will include Red Hat Linux and Novell Open Enterprise Linux. I know for sure that those are not free, and if you use them, you could get in a lot of trouble if it's used commercially. So we use something called CentOS, which is a lot like Red Hat Linux. As you'll see, it's forked from it, and it does a very good job of mimicking a Red Hat Linux environment for you to do testing with. I've worked in jobs before where I use CentOS for the non-production systems, and the production systems were run by Red Hat. That was useful in providing support for the different versions of Linux. So that being said, we're going to talk about some other things. I like to look at when the version was actually designed and when it was written. So if you look at the year there, that's important. Again, I can't really make out what I'm doing with the cursor right now. I think I'm showing that the example that Red Hat is indeed not free. So we've kind of touched on that. And there's the different versions. You may have heard of some of these, you might not have heard of others. But I definitely wanted to bring this to your attention. So get a good look at this chart and get an idea of what is being included with this discussion. And in a minute, we're going to scroll down a little bit more, and we're going to discuss a different chart on this same Wikipedia page. Like I said, I think this is very useful. Here, I want you to notice the different types of file systems. We discussed this previously, and I want you to see that the different file systems are used by the different versions and flavors of Linux. I know we mentioned ext3 and ext4, and that had some relevance to it. This chart here is a little more in depth than I want to get into, and this one is as well. However, I do think that there's a lot of really interesting stuff, so please look through this. Now we're going to discuss this website here called distrowatch.com. Right now I'm on the link for Debian. It provides all kinds of useful information. It talks about the different builds and when they came out. It's got good details on these different builds. It talks about where it's forked from. Since this says independent right here, this is one of the original. In fact, it is the original Linux fork. It tells the different operating systems and types of processors that it supports. All kinds of useful information on this site. If you go back to the main page, you can tell the most popular versions of Linux right now. I myself have not worked with Linux Mint too much, but I have worked with it in one project before. I found it pretty simple to use, but I still wanted to mention it. I can go back to this chart here and we can look up Linux Mint and we can see what flavor it is. And I believe it was based on Debian and Ubuntu, which Ubuntu is based on Debian, so it's some kind of a hybrid system between there. It's also got a gratis license. It is an active version, and apparently it's very popular right now. So that's good information to know. Kali is a specific version of Linux, so it's not get the number of hits that you would expect to see from a more generic version of Linux.